The short answer to whether you need to use a reference photograph when you're drawing is yes. It's that simple, and I could probably end the video here, but let's discuss why it's so important and if there's any cases where it might not be necessary to use a reference photo. So a reference photograph is simply a photograph that you are drawing from. You're using it as your resource and you are trying to draw what you see in that photograph. I get the question of whether you need to use a reference photograph quite often, and I think it's because there's so many amazing videos out there now on YouTube where you see people who are drawing, say, a figure or a portrait, and there's not always a reference photograph included. And so I think people get this idea that to be a good artist, you need to be able to draw from your imagination. When it comes to drawing something as it really appears in the real world, creating an illusion of reality on the page, being able to look at the real subject either in life or through a reference photograph is necessary. And here's why. It's hard to hold a full, still, detailed image in your head. Now, people think in different ways, and some people don't even think in images at all, so I'm told. You might be someone who thinks more in words or feelings, but even if you can picture something in your mind, that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to draw it accurately. And I can only rely on my personal experience with my own brain, but let's do a little test together, and I'd love to hear what you think about this in the comments. I want you to picture someone famous. So let's say Keanu Reeves. Get that image of Keanu in your head. Maybe you're seeing him in The Matrix or in John Wick. You can probably imagine his face, maybe even the way that he moves. But now what I want you to do is try to zoom in on the specific shape of his eyebrows. Can you see that detail clearly? Maybe look at the left eyebrow and then the right eyebrow. I definitely can't do that, and I've been drawing for years. Maybe you can kind of imagine what the eyebrows look like, but if you're relying on your imagination, you'll find that you end up drawing generic shapes and not specific details. These mental images are a bit more like impressions than photographs. They kind of flicker and shift, and sometimes they're a blend of memory and imagination. And our brains tend to fill in the blanks, which is exactly the problem people have when they're trying to draw realistically from their mind, because you can't draw accurately what you can't see clearly. In our everyday lives, we don't need to be able to picture minor details in our mind. Think about how you picture everyday things. Like if you want to go get a cup of tea or a piece of fruit, you don't usually recall every tiny little detail. It's more like a mental symbol of the object in place of a highly detailed thing. This method of representing things with simplified versions or symbols in our mind can make it difficult to draw realistically. Think of some of your first drawings of people. Your first face was probably a wonky circle with 2 dots for eyes and a big smiley mouth. And then maybe when you got older, you upgraded to almond-shaped eyes and sort of a wobbly line for a nose. And these are visual shortcuts. They're symbols that we store in our minds. Even as adults, when we draw, we fall back onto these symbols. Beginner portraits will often have the same almond-shaped eyes because the artist is drawing the symbol of an eye or what they think it looks like and not a specific eye. It's much easier to draw those symbols, but it's not going to help you draw Keanu Reeves. Now, there are some exceptions where you may not need to use a reference photograph. If you're very familiar with your subject, and especially if you've drawn it many times before, you might be able to get away without a reference photo. So there are people who have drawn faces and figures and animals so many times that the process is committed to memory. But they started off with reference photographs too. And if you wanted to doodle or draw from imagination, well, that's totally fine. You don't need a reference photograph for that. And you may prefer to draw abstract or stylized art. But for realistic drawings, especially for faces, anatomy, or objects that you don't often draw, you're always going to get a better, more realistic result using a reference photograph. It's not because you're not creative or you're not a good artist, but it's because realistic drawing is about seeing, not about guessing. If you rely only on your mind, you may still end up with a drawing that looks like a face, but it won't be that person's face. It'll be a kind of amalgamation of the mental symbols that your brain uses to represent faces. Thanks very much for watching. I'd appreciate it if you could like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. And please share your thoughts in the comments on that mental test that we did. Can you hold an image still in your mind? Can you zoom in and see details, or is it all a bit fuzzy and unsteady? I'd love to hear how your visual memory works and whether you've had success drawing without a reference photograph.